Hey everybody, welcome to News from Heaven. This is the show where we take an annotated journey through the writings of Swedenborg to try to figure out life in the mind. Today, we're going to talk about how to talk to angels. And how do you get there? Well, first you got to go through correspondence, talk a bit about the early people, and then we figure out the key. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget, like and subscribe. This is very important. And I want you to comment, because what we're trying to do through talking about angelic influence and everything else that Swedenborg covers is we're trying to help each other out. And we're trying to help each other in the space that we all really inhabit, which is this mind, the solo mind experience, where you can walk around, and even if there's nice people in the world and they care about you, you can still feel like it's all falling apart, or something's coming in, or I am failing, or something bad is happening, or perhaps you know somebody else that's feeling this way. What we're trying to do is get this angelic kind of influence into those minds. And you know what the cure is for a lot of this mental negativity is community. Because when you're in isolation, these dark clouds have just a lot more access to you because it blocks out the truth. So if you leave what you're going through, whatever's going on in your week, what are your dark clouds this week, leave them in the comments. Other people check it out, console each other, talk to each other. The more light we shed, the less darkness there is. And we're going to get a major boost from what we're learning today, because that's going to talk about bringing in not just camaraderie with people, which is hip, but how do you chill with angels? And how do you let that in, both as a supernatural kind of experience, but also as a psychological condition? All right, we're going to do this through Heaven and Hell, Swedenborg's book. Download the link in the description. Scroll down to 87. And he begins talking about our first keyword, correspondence. And if you say, I don't know what correspondence is, of course you don't, because check out this first line. People today, and last I checked it was today, okay, he wrote this a couple hundred years ago, do not know what correspondence is. By the end of the episode, something that seemed like it wasn't worth your time maybe, why would I care about learning about this strange word? This is worth going to any length to learn. You'll see now. There are many reasons for this ignorance. Yeah, why don't people know about correspondence? Well, he's probably going to say something like there's not enough books about it, there's not enough YouTube shows about it. The primary one being that we have moved away from heaven because of our love for ourselves and for the world. And right away, you know, we're talking about some Swedenborgian terminology, love for ourselves, love for the world. These two, love of self, love of the world, those are public enemy. And number two, what am I going to say? Number one, that this right here is what's causing. You look back at the weather the system that we're in, all this negativity, what's driving that, the fuel for that is this love of self, love of the world. So, of course, that cuts us off from everything important, and it also is moving us away from heaven, which doesn't sound that great on its own, and somehow this moving away from heaven leads to this loss of the knowledge of correspondences. And that is a very bizarre thing to say, a condition to say makes us not know what something is. If you think about why wouldn't you know what a term, the definition of a term, like correspondence? So if this is, my first attempt at a profile today, oh my gosh, what is that even? It's a person's head. If there's some bit of knowledge, you'd think if we don't have it, it's because the external resources are not good. There's not enough newspaper articles about correspondence. There's not enough social media posts about correspondence. But he's saying the reason we don't know about it is because of internal things, because we've gotten beset by self-centeredness, by this sense of isolation. It's stuff in our hearts and minds, which must mean that correspondence, if it's not about going and finding that information outside of you, correspondence, this strange Latinate word, I don't even know if it's Latinate, is something that we should just be able to pick up intuitively about life if we had the right sort of focus. You see, people who love themselves and the world above all, that above all is key, because it's not just that it's fine to want what you want and to be, flirting with your self-image, but to have that be above everything causes problems. And this is why. Focus on nothing but earthly matters, because these provide gratification to their more outward senses and pleasure to their moods. So I'm going to have to clear off the worst head drawing ever, because we need this real estate here, because I want to draw another person. But in here, Swedenborg is starting to set up a 2-layered gingerbread-looking person. And this is all of us. So I'll fill this in a second. Edge of your seat, I know. They did not attend to spiritual matters because these offer gratification to their deeper senses and pleasures to their minds. So they set such matters aside, saying they are too lofty to think about. Oh, this spiritual stuff is probably not true because it's not doing anything for me, which is totally fine, but it blocks us off from some truth. So let's say there's 2 parts to us, because here he's describing we've got outward senses and we've got deeper senses. So there's a 2-part person, an inner self and an outer self. And out here, you have these 2 things, loving self and loving the world, and loving spiritual matters. They're doing the same thing, but for these different parts of us. The outward senses and the moods affect us on this outermost level. But the spiritual matters do the same pumping us up, but in the mental and deeper sense levels. So unless you have this holistic picture where you're interested in both, of course, the one you're spending all your time on, if we're totally caught up in surface sort of things, and earthly matters, it could be just things like I'm paying attention to providing myself with sustenance and the events that come up in my day. But Swedenborg also lumps into that things like prestige and concern for your reputation and getting even, all this ego sort of stuff that we find ourselves tangled up in day to day. If we live in that world exclusively and never take time to sit back and think about what it's like to be someone else or contemplate that there might be something higher outside of ourselves, we shut ourselves off from a part of life. And in doing so, unsubscribe ourselves from some basic fundamental knowledges about life. One of these being correspondences. The early people, and here we have another keyword. What's up with the early people? Are you talking about like morning people? What is this? The early people behaved differently. For them, and I guess I better explain because he doesn't. He does in other places, but he doesn't right here. The early people are, I don't know why I need to draw more stick people, but these are the early people. And they are people who lived earlier in the course of human history. Swedenborg doesn't necessarily specify a time frame for them, but he says it was a mindset in humanity that it's the golden age, the idyllic kind of harmony with nature, but also back when people lived in love and had a greater connection with the spiritual world, which we're about to hear about. This was a time in which things hadn't quite got as convoluted as they are now. So what's different about these early people as compared to us happening modern people, or at least the people Swedenborg was talking about in the 1700s? For them, knowledge about, here's that correspondence again, correspondences was the pearl of all knowledge. So this funny thing that most people today haven't even heard of was the greatest thing, the pearl, I'll put a little shine on that, of all knowledge. Why is that? What does it do for you? By means of it, they gained intelligence and wisdom. Well, not so bad. Interesting that there's one thing you can study that can lead you into this. But that's probably about as high as it goes, right? And by means of it, those who are of the church, which he uses again that term to talk about a state of mind that can be spread across many religious denominations or systems, but the people who had this knowledge within that system had a communication with heaven. That's starting to get good. So something about being immersed in this correspondence, this way of looking at life, gave them communication with heaven. Let's up the ante a little bit, right? Knowledge about correspondences is, in fact, angelic knowledge, which sounds really cool. Angelic sounds like a good word, but what does it mean? It's just a phrase. Is it just lofty, or does it make you more like an angel to know it? Well, he gets very specific here. The earliest ones, and this is we're getting now to how to talk to angels. You could feel us creeping closer. We're starting to talk about connection to heaven, having angelic knowledge, but how do we open that door and get this communication with heaven? The earliest ones who were heavenly people, which that is not just meaning, oh, they were nice people. That's a technical term, meaning that they were, it's also translated celestial. This means basically that the heart predominated, so they lived based on what they loved, and what they loved was the neighbor and God. This was, again, this idyllic state that led to this state of mind that had correspondences as this thing they were all native in. They did their thinking from correspondences like angels. So whatever angels are doing, right? So you've got angels somewhere, and you don't really think about how do angels think. You think about, oh, maybe they might come down and stop me from walking across the street at a certain time. But when they're just being angels, what's it like what kind of thoughts do you have? Are you sitting there and say, oh, I can't believe it's already 3:45. I better go do this. Or I wonder, that last time I shone glory down, could I have done a little more? What is it? What is the internal monologue of an angel? I don't know, but it's based in somehow thinking from these correspondences. So they thought from correspondences like angels so that they could even talk with angels. Now that's a fascinating point, because we kind of think, if we're back here and we're hoping for some kind of angelic light to come in, and we know that there's angels out there, and we know we got problems here in the world, our dark clouds are serving us up all kinds of misery and attack and who we are and what we care about, and we don't know why we're struggling so much. And we think, wouldn't it be great if angels would help us out? And sometimes people have great experiences reaching out, but other times you're asking for help and it just feels like there's nothing coming in. And you begin to wonder, why not? Is it because there are no angels? Or is it because angels don't care about us, that they hear us, but they're saying, oh, there's a better person to help over here, or I'm very busy in my garden over here? What breaks it up? And Swedenborg is proposing that it's actually like a communication technology issue, that there's probably the channel between us and them should be a little more cyan or something like that, wouldn't you think? So that there's the communication channel that should be here is what is disrupted. There's a missing element here. And that element is that they think in a certain way, but we think in the opposite way. And that these two languages, they just can't interface. It's just like the Mac and the PC of mental communication. I won't say which one is which one. So how do we get there? Further, and so that's pretty nice, because connection with angels would both be like overt experiences, but also the uplifting thoughts and feelings we need to get through the day. It seems like that would be about the coolest thing you could experience, if you could talk openly with angels like these people could. But that's not. It gets better than that. Further, the Lord, meaning God, was quite often visible to them and taught them. So the only thing better when you're feeling alone than maybe an angel coming and hanging out is, oh, I'm just the Lord right here, and I can, instead of you ambiguously looking around and on YouTube and you're so desperate that you're watching some strange show where a guy is drawing with electronic markers on a 100-year-old book, God is sitting there talking to you. That is the state that was meant to be, and somehow that was made possible. It's not like God loves us less now than he did before. But something about this knowledge of correspondences allowed for this direct link in teaching. So that's pretty great. Why did we drop the ball? Right? Nowadays, though, this knowledge has been so completely lost that people do not know what correspondence is. So we left out something because of the love of self and love of the world that blocked us from this communication. Now, and this is where Swedenborg is, this whole section in Heaven and Hell is leading into Swedenborg telling us what correspondence is. So don't worry, he does explain it. We will get to a little bit of that here. But in this paragraph, he's justifying to his reader, because, reading Swedenborg, it's not everybody's cup of tea. So he's trying to, this is why I'm delving into this strange philosophical sounding thing, which just could be like talking to people, nutrition, to say, listen, I'm telling you, this is why you need to eat vitamin B3 or D3 before you knew what that was. It sounds like I don't need that thing, but you do. You just don't know it. So Swedenborg's trying to keep us along for the ride. And how important is it to know about correspondences? Couldn't be that bad. Now, without some grasp of correspondences, nothing can be known in clear light about the spiritual world. Oh, in case you want to know about the other side of reality, or about its inflow into the natural world, or how the two connect, what leads to the situation that we're in. Nothing at all about what the spiritual is relative to the natural, the positioning, how do these two worlds relate to each other. Nothing in clear light about the human spirit that is called the soul. Do you want to know anything about the core part of you? You might want to know this, and how it affects the body inwardly, meaning where does the body end and the soul begins, and how do they interact? I'll raise you this. Nothing about our state after death. So you can't even know the life that you're headed to without this knowledge. That's a pretty good list. Because of all this, I need to define it and explain what it is like. This will also pave the way for matters that are to follow. And it's true, if you're going to go around in Swedenborg, looking up Swedenborgy stuff, you've got to have this template. So I want to take this next paragraph and its following little clause at the end of this other page, and I want to lift it off the page this way into a diagram. I've got the text here on the bottom because I want to try to break out what could be the briefest introduction to this knowledge of correspondences that's so hip that it's basically got a whole paragraph yellow highlighted about it. So he says, first, I need to state what correspondence is. The whole natural world, here we've got the natural world, is responsive to the spiritual world. So, spiritual world being this sort of level up in existence, natural world being us. Above the spiritual world, you have, the divine itself. So this natural world is somehow responsive. So the spiritual world does something, and the natural world reacts. Somehow there is an effect in the natural world. And I'll give you a little bonus knowledge that it's really the divine coming into the spiritual world, which then comes into the natural world. This is how reality emanates and flows out. The natural world, not just in general, but in detail. So it's not that there is a large chain of 3 pieces like we've got here, and that's it. Everything in the natural world. So you say you have people, and you have cows, and you have houses. Everything, you probably could come up with some examples of things that are in the natural world. Everything in there is being affected by this inflow from the spiritual world. And actually, I'll let him say it in this next sentence before I show it. So whatever arises in the natural world out of the spiritual world, one is called something that corresponds. That this inflow is that there is something analogous to a house here. And there's something analogous to a person here, which could well be an angel. There's something analogous to a cow here. And it's those things that are actually in detail the soul of, or giving rise to, or providing the foundation for the existence of the stuff we see around us all the time. So these two sets, we're seeing God kind of echo, like hitting different substrates and echoing in those as it goes. It needs to be realized that the natural world arises from and is sustained in being by the spiritual world. That you couldn't just pull the spiritual world out and say, well, just do the natural world from now on. That we are I already used the term echo. What's something else that's like an echo? We are a reflection, or if you think about, something that is the magma under the Earth's crust, and then seismic activity on the Earth's crust, that we are in a system that is directly responsive there. Arises, sustained into being by the spiritual world exactly the way an effect relates to a sufficient cause. So what correspondence is saying is that the spiritual world is the cause, and the natural world is the effect. Cause and effect. And that may seem like an abstract thing initially, but if you just start to let that rattle around in your mind for a bit and start to think, this is an effect of the spiritual world, that whatever that I see around me, the way things are, the way they operate, the way they interact, the events that are happening, the nature of creatures and organisms, this is directly influenced by the spiritual world. And what I find is, as I start to open my mind to that, you start to think, this is actually telling me about the spiritual world, and the spiritual world being the thing that composes your thoughts and feelings as well. So everything you see around you is actually a map telling you about God and about who you are and about what life is. And it's not like you can just pick it up like that. He said we lost the knowledge, right? But there is this link. The earliest people could look at a forest and understand who they were and who God was. And it was because they were primed like this that you had this open communication there. That's the news from heaven. The whole world around you is telling you all this stuff. The whole world around you is waiting to be a mechanism to connect you to angels, to God, to everything that's good, and to everything that's going to open us up to blast away these clouds and just bring in this heaven that's all around us. All this heaven is around us here. If we just can open our minds in the right way, it's all ready to come in this explosion of happy color. I kind of like how that turned out. So, how'd it go? Did this lift your mood at all? Did we open little channels to heaven in your mind as it was going? Let me know in the comments, right? And also, I want to know, is that applicable at all? Because to me, that seems cool. Correspondences, it's a good starting place. Obviously, there's more to read in this section. But do you feel like you took away anything from that could be helpful? Or do you have any thoughts on how do we get back to that state that the early people were in, where they could have this awesome direct communication that I think I myself would love to have? I'd love to have a sit down with God and with angels and figure things out. How do we get there? What steps do we take? And because Swedenborg's whole canon, or his whole body of work, was essentially trying to explain these correspondences and get people thinking in them again. Have you ever come across anything in Swedenborg that feels like it's a step in there? Write that all in the comments, because I want to figure it out. I want to learn it from you. Talk to each other. Give each other encouragement. That would be awesome. Like and subscribe this, because we're trying our best here too. That will guarantee an angel conversation. Just kidding. But do it if you're in the mood to help us out. Thank you so much for spending some time here, and I'll see you next time on the News from Heaven.